Welcome back, everyone, to the closing plenary for today. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Ewan Birney, who's the director of the European Bioinformatics Institute, EBI, and is one of the leading lights in genomics. Ewan is a champion for open science and making the genome freely available, information freely available for to all. And I think also today, coinciding with the announcement of Google DeepMind's announcement on protein folding, AlphaFold, is just a really exciting time to have you join us today, Ewan. So Ewan, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. And I wanted to talk really today about data sharing, and specifically this project which I'm chair of, the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. So I'm not going to talk about my own research or about EBI, except the fact that EBI does a lot of work here for GA4GH, or provides a lot of it. I'm going to focus on this data sharing project. So what is GA4GH? It's about responsible genomic data sharing for the benefit of human health. And that is mainly a technical project, but we also have a very strong regulatory and ethics project. And if you're interested in that, we activate two human rights. So the UN Charter for Human Rights has the right for science, and it has the right to participate in scientific studies, and it's the right to benefit from science. And that's where we start much of our discussion when we talk about regulatory and ethics. GA4GH, we've been around for quite some time, since 2013. There's quite a lot of us in 90 different countries. Many different people participate in different ways. But in particular, when I became chair 4 years ago, I instituted an association with 24 different driver projects. Now that includes Genomics England in the UK, includes some of the big projects in the US. These are very concrete projects that are delivering pieces of genomics that bring healthcare and research together. And we have lots of different technical aspects, regulatory aspects. The organization as a whole does not provide implementations, but the people involved in the GA4GH ecosystem do provide implementations of this to enable the global learning health system. And I just want to take you through this kind of journey of what happens to a piece of data. So you have a citizen or a patient on the left here, and she is perhaps going through a healthcare process. She is going to be approached by a clinician to be consented for her data to be used for in the future for research. That will be looked after by some data custodian. And then a researcher or a clinician will want to use that data in conjunction with other data sets or other individuals and other data sets around the world. And that will be to generate a piece of research on that piece of information. Now, GA4GH populates this cycle with different technical standards. I should say here, I know that many people inside of HDR UK come from the epidemiology kind of research world. And in some sense, this is just epidemiology and secondary use of healthcare data. So in some sense, this is all just the same stuff as epidemiology. However, one of the differences is that we have these very large, technically complex data sets in genomics, proteomics, and metabolomics. And therefore, we need good tools to manipulate them. We can't just hand them around as tab delimited files. And furthermore, we need good computational systems to be able to handle them, because very often we'll have to do the work kind of on rest, as it were. So as you can see, these little circles show where the GA4GH standards fit inside of this life cycle. It goes from machine readable consent guidance and thinking about how people declare how you can use your data, and that it's being done in an ontology, so it's machine readable rather than something that a human has to read, through to the reciprocity between ethics review and recognition, so that different ethics groups can perhaps have reciprocal links with other ethics groups around the world for certain data topics. it goes to actually how you store and process the data, these long-standing genomic standards of BAM, CRAM, VCF, and the other kind of bread and butter of genomics. And then when you get to the researcher is very often going to interact with the data at rest in a jurisdiction, a trusted research environment, a cloud, a private cloud of some sort. And therefore, the researcher needs to be confident that they can write a piece of code that can access this data in many different contexts. And to do that, they need to have APIs for retrieving data sets, for analyzing, and for handling phenotypic and search discovery information. We just went through a roadmap process, which had both a bottom-up and a top-down. You can learn more about this roadmap process. The bottom-up is the product roadmap, thinking about what each area of GA4GH is going to do over the next 2 years. And we had a gap analysis, which in fact, your very own Andrew Morris was one of the 2 leaders of that gap analysis and implemented the major gaps we had. This process led to us thinking about not only what we have delivered, so this is the shopping list of things we had delivered. These includes these incredibly sort of standard data formats like CRAM and VCF, but through into these more interesting things like the GA4GH passports for data use and researcher identities. And thinking a little bit ahead about what we are going to do over the next couple of years, the stuff in the clinical phenotype space, in ensuring that our cloud interoperations really work, in discovery of these data sets, and then a bit of a shopping list on the regulatory and ethics engagement policies. And the next bit, I just want to make some of this concrete for you to realize what the opportunities are about adopting GA4GH standards. So there's lots of data standards that I could have talked about. One close to my heart is this compressed data format called CRAM for sequence reads. If you're not using it, it will save you space on your DNA sequence. A more interesting standard is an at-rest encryption wrapper called Crypt4GH. This can wrap both CRAM and VCF, and in fact other formats, in a way in which the encryption at rest can be handled. There's a 2-key system that allows you to hand out keys to users to address the same file that you have encrypted. And then for the real geeks, if you know the format that we tend to follow exchange genomic variation in, called VCF, it scales to the square of the number of samples. Now, this is not good news. And because of that, we need new formats or new extensions to VCF to get the scaling below the square, and that's a very hot topic at the moment in the data group. But that's sort of rather standard genomic standards. I want to talk more about the generic aspects and in particular highlight this aspect of GA4GH passports and visas. Now, this in some sense is simply passports. By GA4GH passports, we really mean federated identity like EduRoam, but with more aspects to it. And then GA4GH visas means federated authorization, so the ability to see data sets. But we found that we had a big communication problem between us and in particular the ethics groups about what these identities federated things were. And that is why we've adopted this language of passports and visas. So your federated identity is called a GA4GH passport, indicates who you are, key attributes of you. For example, are you a bona fide researcher is an attribute on your passport. Visas are things that are stamped on your passport or go with your passport, and they give you access to certain data sets for a time-limited period. And the nice things about visas is that you can have visa exemptions, like when you fly to the US, you can fill in a form on flight, and that's a bit like getting exemptions for seeing low-risk data sets. Whereas if you want to visit, I don't know, North Korea, you'll have to go through a much more protracted visa acquisition process, visiting the embassy. And so the presence of a visa can be very, very secure when needed, or very, very light touch when needed. Now, just to reassure you, these are not physical things. You don't get issued with a passport. You don't get stamps. These things are actually computational processes that hook into standard internet protocols. And so for the geeks in the audience, GA4GH passports, it's standard federated identity. It's in fact exactly the same as EduRoam or these identity providers, but with additional attributes to assert properties of the individual from the institution. So the institution, in my case, EBI, would indicate that I have this federated identity. I'm Birney at ebi.ac.uk. And then this attribute that I'm a bona fide researcher is asserted by the institution. And then the second thing, which is GA4GH visas, these are standard federated authorization tokens, JWT tokens in the parlance. Talking to some of the security people we have in GA4GH, they said that nobody has really used federated authorization in anger at the same level that we're aiming for here. And so I think that's quite exciting, that we really have the need for federated authorization. And just to think about this, you may well have a third-party cloud. There may be an HDR UK secure cloud environment. It may be hosting data on behalf of a number of places, but the federated authorization comes from a different party. So you'll have three different parties. It could be the University of Exeter's federated authorization server working on the HDR UK secure environment using a federated identity that came from EBI. And we want that three-way process to work correctly. And the other area which has really progressed over the last 2 years are cloud standards. In many ways, a lot of this is not specific to genomics. In some ways, it's producing an interop layer on top of the AWS, Google Cloud, and OpenStack components that do provide many of these things. But we need that interop layer because we will not have one cloud provider, certainly not worldwide, and probably not inside of one country. And this has really progressed. So we have now done one task portability test. So this is an example of a genome-wide association analysis on dummy data performed in multiple systems, and we can get that to work across these 4 different clouds, very different implementations of these clouds. And we've also put together a full stack that involves a workflow execution service, so a complex workflow with loops and scatter gathers, access to data through the data repository service, DRS, using your GA4GH passport with a GA4GH visa and starting with a search. And the goal here is to get many different cloud environments ready to work inside of, be compatible with GA4GH to deploy these standards. And here's the obligatory kind of list of different groups who have participated so far in the different bake-offs on the cloud. And I'd love to see an HDR UK logo on there in the future. And I'm going to paste this YouTube video here. For the non-geeks, this is a way of explaining what is going on with the visualization of a little robot for a virtual machine. I want you to, when you watch it, watch for the poor robot who gets turned away because he's not been issued with the right authorization. And so he gets turned away from the lift door and he has a little sad face on him. For the geeks, I actually think this is one of the best metaphors I've seen about cloud and virtual machines for explaining this to a broad group of people. So let me just now focus in on the UK. GA4GH is global. I could have given you a slide of all the different countries that we're interacting with, but I want to now focus more narrowly on the UK. So one thing which I should have put on the slide is that EBI is based in the UK, and so we're European, but still, we are not affected by Brexit because our treaty is separate from the European Union. and we participate very heavily in GA4GH. But importantly for the UK, both Genomics England and UK Biobank have both placed GA4GH standards on their roadmap. And something that I now have a goal to do in 2021, stimulated by our top-down gap analysis, is to activate these commitments on their research environments. And if anybody from Genomics England and UK Biobank are listening, I will be bringing my cheerleading pom-poms out to make these commitments good. We also want to create GA4GH implementations with the community to retrofit existing HPC farm setups. And we think that's going to be happening in 2021. So this is where we take existing setups and do the necessary retrofit so that GA4GH standards will run inside of existing research environments. And if anybody's interested, please contact me. And then the final thing is the importance of this federated identity and federated authorization, because those two things are really important, that institutions have a line of sight on and people with data sets have a line of sight on. So this is to enable GA4GH passports and GA4GH visas. Now, just to think a little bit more specifically about HDR UK, I think the community in HDR UK is a great fit to the ClinPheno work package. And I know that many people, including my colleague Helen Parkinson at Embley BI, is a big part of that. So please come into the wonderful world of interoperation between healthcare data and genomics across the world. What does this mean? It means this HL7 FHIR phenopackets, and it also means these cross-ontology works between ICD-10, SNOMED, HBO terms, and other ontologies. I know that research environments and secure environments are a big part of the HDR UK future, and that's something I would like to discuss, aligning your development with GA4GH standards. And then the final thing for a future where these federated identity and federated authorization is a reality, it does mean that we have to do advocacy in all of our institutions to implement this. So what does this mean is that you need to have a federated identity server from your institution, and it needs to have these attributes that are being suggested in GA4GH. So for example, is this researcher a bona fide researcher? For data providers, if you're providing data sets, it means implementing GA4GH visa servers. And there are a couple of implementations that one can pick up, open source. You don't have to use those, but it also means probably talking to the regulatory, the DACs, the data access committees, that this is coming, and that rather than sending out emails and maybe logins as the way of authorizing, you rather have an authorization server where the DAC interacts and says this user is authorized to see this data set for this time period. And that business of having GA4GH visa servers, I think, will lead us very quickly onto a discussion about data provisioning and the depth of data provisioning across the health data arena. And I think that's a place where there's a lot of synergy to be realized between this very federated technical mindset that's coming from GA4GH, and I think some of the drivers from HDR UK. Caroline mentioned also about GA4GH as a kind of social experiment as well. I just want to have a little comment about GA4GH. So I actually met Zoom not first in the pandemic, but first in GA4GH. So I was doing these kind of crazy Zoom meetings with colleagues in Australia through GA4GH, and it was like, oh my gosh, it works. It's kind of amazing. So GA4GH is a global first, Zoom first organization. And basically it's Slack, Zoom, and WhatsApp channels as work tools for coordinating people. But this does require you to be respectful and flexible of time zones and life demands. Now, one person's time zone is another person's school pickup. So in some sense, that flexibility, I think, is of benefit for everybody. Even when you're in the same time zone, being kind of respectful and flexible in both directions, as it were, is very, very useful. The Secretariat's distributed in 3 locations in 2 time zones. The participants are distributed globally. There is a bit of a nightmare that if you try and get India, West Coast, and Europe on the same thing, someone has to be up at 2 a.m. in the morning. But then you have to work out how you're going to be that respectful and flexible about it. And we were coming together physically twice a year, but perhaps post-pandemic, we'll do it once a year, kind of all hands, with in the future local meetings zoomed together somehow in 2022, and we're still exploring that. So with that, I'm very, very happy to take questions. I should have had a better thank you slide than this. I want to acknowledge all my colleagues in GA4GH, in particular the ones working at EBI, Helen, Andy Yates, Rishi Nag, and Thomas Keane, but also the ones across the UK and across the world. So thank you for listening.
Wonderful, thank you, Ewan. Really, really interesting, and so many points we can draw out on that. I wonder if I could start with the first question, which is, I mean, you kind of laid out the potential of all the different aspects of standards, how we can start addressing all of those challenges you laid out there. What are the benefits we could get from this? So what can we not do now that we will be able to do by following all of those different aspects?
So I think the major thing is we just lower the barriers for data sharing easily, or federated data analysis is probably a better way of putting it. And therefore people explore more data sets and do better powered data analysis. And success, what does success look like? Actually, success is when the standards are so implicit, we don't even talk about them for this. I think the other interesting thing about these technical standards, very similar to the internet standards, is we have no authority. No one is in charge of GA4GH. There is no single authority about who makes decisions on data sets. There's no single authority about how we do the ethics. So each decision about whether this researcher is allowed to see this particular data set can be made there and then at that point in time. And everyone still has full control of those processes. So that, I think, is very useful in diffusing what otherwise becomes quite complicated. You know, if there's going to be a trusted environment, where is it going to be? Or if there's going to be a controlled system, who's got control of the controlled system? And the answer, the internet answer is, you all have control of your own patch. And you all make decisions about who gets to see your data via these standards.
Great, and there's a question here from Sushil Varma, which is saying there's kind of interesting parallels between GA4GH and HDR UK, and this kind of concept of building people as an infrastructure. So we have all the same challenges between data sets and technology, but the hardest nut to crack is around the people side of things and how getting that kind of interoperability. What are your thoughts on what experiences have you had of that, and what kind of lessons can we draw over to help?
Yeah, I mean, I think we underestimate the importance of the people side sometimes quite easily. And again, I think there's two aspects of that. There is a high level alignment. If institutions and organizations are not aligned with this goal, then you can't expect the people inside of those institutions and organizations to kind of co-create that future. But even once you've got institutions and organizations aligned, you then have to do the people thing on the ground. And I think good communication is important. I think what we've learned in this pandemic is that communication does not have to always be in person. So a good mix of in-person and electronic is very leveling, as we've all discovered. So it actually really changes some of the geography in a positive way, because you don't need to worry about whether you're in, you know, Australia or London for participation in some of these things.
And how far do you think we could bring things together? So some of the examples you said there of the passports, of visas, obviously similar concepts we'll need to think through from a health data perspective. How far could we get to be getting to the same thing? And
I just please walk in there and just don't feel so. Just as GA4GH passports builds on top of the federated identity services that are present across Europe, I'd be really hopeful that there could be an HDR UK or a health data identity system and passport system that was compatible with GA4GH, so you could use your same identity, so these would be extending the attributes needed for this federated identity. So there is a dance to be done here, because I know there is some federated identity aspects to the NHS that's interesting in this world here, but I'm pretty sure we're using the same fundamental aspects, and it's all about the attributes. So it's getting that alignment. I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but I've noticed that the federated identity thing is working better and better. You're asked to kind of log in on Google, you log in on Google, other things magically work. You're a bit like, oh, that's a bit freaky. Something's doing some communication, which I don't understand. And I think we want to head to the same direction. And there's no reason why we can't have that really quite smooth. I won't necessarily say that everything's going to be one click away, because I think some of the things that we want to do are not one click away. And that goes to the difference of the visa. Sometimes you get you just book your flight to America, you say my passport's valid, and you fill in your form, on the way to America. And then there's other things where you really, you're going to go to work somewhere, you do need to go and visit the American embassy, you do need to get the stamp in the passport and those things. And so I do think we will have the same thing about accessing health data. Some things you'll just be able to click and they'll be low risk, and the other side will say that bona fide researchers can see this level of data. But other things, there'll be, no, you have to make a full application, it will have to be considered, a human will have to be in the loop, but then you will get electronic authorization for that access.
And then as we look through, so you're obviously a lot further down the journey of kind of the international and global aspects of the data, kind of from that perspective. How should we be thinking from a health data? I mean, there are clearly parallels, but where do you think there are differences and how we should be thinking about that?
I mean, I think there's, again, GA4GH in some sense, the genomics here is a health data component, and this goes to the fact that in some sense we are just doing standard secondary use of healthcare data for research, just like epidemiology has done previously. But we've had this scale need and this technical need that has meant that we're just basically pretty geeky about that. So I think some of it is very similar. I think one aspect about health data, which is, that this interplay between what one does operationally and what is made available for research, and whether there needs to be any uplift on operational data to research data. So personally, I think we need to do a bit more here in capturing that uplift process where it's data cleaning, it's imputation, it is some of these kind of really grungy parts of data science. And I think we underestimate the importance of that, and we often don't capture the end result of that. And that means everybody has to redo that process on data sets. And the simplest way to capture it is to capture the final data set. So now you have blobs. You don't have live data. I mean, capturing the methods is great, but also capturing the final data set, I think, is a very, very valid thing to do. So that difference between the operational data set and the research-ready data set, and capturing the research-ready data set is, I think, is a really interesting thing where I think HDR UK has a big role to play.
Fantastic. And I must ask you, as I mentioned at the start, before we go, obviously the news today with Google DeepMind and the protein folding. Just great to hear your thoughts as to why is this so exciting for those of us who are newer to the field of protein folding, very new to, in fact. Why should I be excited about this? Well,
I don't know if you've seen my quote. I am quoted to saying that I almost fell off my chair. My quote to the AlphaFold thing was a bit more fruity, let me say, directly to the team. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. This is a problem that was stated 50 years ago. Many people, we know that nature solves this problem, regularly, every day, every second, every millisecond it's happening. And yet incredibly intelligent people have run at this for 50 years. And for the last 20 years, we've had a a competition to even know precisely how badly we've been doing at it. And then for this system to come along and do it, it's been remarkable. It's actually quite hard to know the impact of this. It's one of those things where it's so long been a given that we can't do this prediction process that we don't actually know the impact now we can do it. And there have been some hot takes, I think both of these extremes are wrong. We're going to understand all of life, that's clearly wrong. And then there's some other people who say, oh, it's going to be pointless. So, we already know all the structures we know. I saw that on Twitter today. I was like, oh gosh. No, so it's going to be somewhere in the middle between those two things. But there I've used the analogy that the tide has lifted, yesterday. The tide went up a lot yesterday, and everybody's got to think about where they are on this new point of the tide and where they can go now the tide has lifted. So it's quite exciting about what research that enables.
And hopefully they'll be thinking about the links of health data at that stage, and perhaps seeing
it's quite a long way from protein structure to health data, but it's not impossible.
Very open and warm community to join.
The link there actually truly is genomics and genomic variations. So that mostly brings us back to GFGH.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Ewan, so much for your time this afternoon. It's been fantastic to kind of talk to you and hear your thoughts on.
And just to remind you, both Kate, I noticed, and myself, we have posted the YouTube video, and do look at the little charming robots. The robots are very cute.
I'm looking forward to seeing the sorry robot and things on there. Thank you, Ewan. That's been brilliant. So at this point, at the end of today, I'm with hugely great pleasure, delighted to welcome Andrew Morris, who's Director of HDR UK, to provide our closing remarks today. Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Caroline, and thank you, everyone. We've still got fantastic audience retention, so thank you for staying around. I'll be very brief. I won't be 2 hours. Just a few thoughts. We've had a terrific day. To coin a phrase from Ewan, global first, Zoom first. And I think if you look at the contributors today, from Bangkok, from California to Clacton, we've really have spanned the globe in terms of this UK Health Data Research Alliance Symposium. So a huge thank you to everyone who's participated. So I've got one or two very pleasant tasks. The first is actually to announce the winner of the lightning talk. So can I thank Liz, Zamil, Ron, and Hakim for 4 outstanding talks at lunchtime. And we had a huge public vote. We nearly crashed the system. But I'm really pleased to say that, and we can move the slides on, the winner is Liz. So Liz Dobson, an outstanding, rapid, agile development to support people living with inflammatory bowel disease during the COVID-19 pandemic. Hurrah. So, and Liz has just put hurrah. What will I do with the £1 million? No, we're not quite that generous, Liz. So, but congratulations. And just to say, the standard was exceptional. And I would encourage you to look at it on the playback video. So just a few reflections on the day. In our quest to develop and maintain the integrity of a health data research ecosystem that earns trust, I would echo Otterline's comments this morning that this is a technology challenge, but more importantly, it's a social challenge. And how do we build that social infrastructure to earn the trust to use data, detailed data at scale? And that will require ethicists, social scientists, lawyers, bioinformaticians, computer engineers, data engineers, clinicians, policymakers, and regulators. And I think we've been very privileged today to have a program that has brought together industry, academia, NHS, the charitable sector, government, but most importantly, there's been a golden thread of the public's contributing and helping to shape the policy, the plans, the research agenda moving forward. So can I thank everyone who's contributed today? And it truly it hasn't only been cross-sectoral in terms of principal sectors, but it's also been interdisciplinary. So we've had contributions from CERN, from Amazon, alongside contributions from NHS Digital. And I would argue that only if we get this social infrastructure right will we deliver on our quest. The second key issue has been around a need to focus on quality of data, both structured and unstructured, and how do we bring together and embolden the expertise we need to ensure that the data engineering is fit for purpose, so that the research data are of sufficient quality. And I think that's something you will see an increasing emphasis on as we build out the blueprint for a digital infrastructure for the UK. And then a third reflection for me is on diversity and inclusion, especially as we begin to look at the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning. We must ensure that there's not health data poverty. This is a phrase that Alistair Denniston in Birmingham has coined. So I'm very keen that in HDR UK, we always think of diversity inclusion in everything we do. And that's why I was thrilled to see the launch of the Black internship program today under the leadership of Martin Livermore. So a huge thank you to Martin and the team. This is a small but an important step in what we want to do. So a few thanks. So if we go up a slide, please. Yes. So that was it's got a very long name, Alliance Symposium, the ASAC. So the ASAC met many times. And I think you will agree we had 50 participants today, and the quality, the breadth, the expertise were just stunning. So a round of applause to the ASAC, and you did it so well, you can do it all again next year. So that's the ASAC. Next, if we go on to, I mentioned Martin and the team who did an outstanding job in guiding us and providing leadership for the Black internship program. So a huge thanks to that team, and also to flag that we would like to see this scale. Thirdly, the Lightning Talks Selection Committee, and led ably by Peggy and Paula. And we'd like to thank all members of the Lightning Talks Committee, which I think was a huge success and a distinctive part of the program. So in terms of next steps, I'd just like to thank you all for joining us. A random thought on the day that the CASP challenge, which is the Critical Assessment of Protein Structure project. So this is a challenge which, as we heard, DeepMind won today to define protein structures and configurations using artificial intelligence. A random thought is that we might have an annual challenge, a grand challenge in health data research, so that we bring the community together and hopefully accelerate our way to success. So from CASP to HASP. So we'll maybe put a few thoughts together for a HASP challenge. So thank you for joining us. A couple of thoughts. We will be making all the sessions available on the internet as of next week. So keep an eye out for those. I try to join every parallel session, but I've still missed a lot. So I would encourage people to dip in and dip out of some wonderful content. Please do fill in the participant and delegate response form, because we really like to get your feedback, because we need to do even better next time. And lastly, we we have penciled in, we have 2 major symposia a year. So the major One Institute scientific event looking at the science of the infrastructure, the science of the hubs, the science of the using health data is on the 24th of June. So with that, on behalf of Caroline and myself and everyone at HDR UK, a huge thank you to everyone who's contributed today, particularly Ottoline, Ewan and Doug, who kindly helped with the plenary lectures. Thank you for your participation, your leadership, and for being a great member of a team science endeavor. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye.